When you're configuring, I don't know, I think I might actually open this up in a text editor and show a little bit about how these two main configuration files bring all of OpenSurf together with this meaningful request framework. So it's a standard way of representing client-server applications where the servers can be clustered out, invisible to the client, so they don't necessarily know that they're talking to backend 1 or 10 for a given service. They're structured in such a way that a service has multiple methods attached to it. So you connect to a service and request a particular method, you pass it input params, and it goes off and does whatever magic it needs to do to then return a result to the client. The mechanism for meshing those servers together is XMPP, the Jabber communication protocol, which gives you things like a bit of replication if you want, but primarily it's just an extremely fast way of providing low latency communication between the servers. Servers themselves can be clients of other OpenSurf services, so a single method may then call out to several other servers, and because it's behind sort of the wall, those communications happen extremely fast. Implementation languages, sorry, that's a really important thing to have as well. OpenSurf started being developed in Perl, and that's still sort of the main development language for it. Where there's a need for performance or optimization, a given service will be re-implemented in C. So an example of that is one of the data access APIs was originally implemented in Perl and used Perl DBI. But because that's a critical core function, it's called like almost every time you call some of the, this is the Evergreen application, it's called almost every time you call one of the services, they re-implement that in C, and it's 100 times faster. So Python is also supported as a server language and as a client language. You might still see some vestigial references to Python in the workshop.html document that I linked to. Originally the goal was to flesh out a set of Python examples as well, but in practice nobody's using Python today. And it wasn't sort of the highest priority for getting here. So you'll see Perl, and then on the JavaScript side, using the OpenSurf over HTTP translator Apache module, you can use JavaScript calls to basically post data to the service, post it to the Apache server, and that then sends that via XMPP to the OpenSurf servers, translates it back into a response to JavaScript. But it gives you things like stateful connections. So with the gateway, the deprecated gateway approach for HTTP communication, one of the limitations is that I don't think you can have stateful connections. So a stateful connection is when you pin a communication between the client and a particular server backend. It's really useful if, say, you're doing some database work and you want to open up a new transaction, and then you want to commit that transaction. If you're getting handed off to a random backend, you might not be committing what it was that you thought you were committing, or you'll get errors, right? So having a stateful connection enables you to talk to something, go back and forth with the database with a particular backend server. Does that help a little bit?
A little, yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I really kind of want to get into code, because for me the code helps resolve what this OpenSurf thing is.
Okay.
And in some ways, this is where I do some hand waving. In some ways, you almost don't want to care what OpenSurf is, because if you write a client and it works, you write a server and it works, then the magic that happened in between is fine. But it's important to know where some of the breakage points can be if you're delving into creating a new service. And eJabber.d is the Jabber server of choice, and it has its own configuration problems that probably rival anything else in terms of getting this up installed. Right, so this is, you'll see in some of the old documentation, wiki pages on the Evergreen ILS system, references to bootstrap.conf, or you have to bootstrap your configuration. And that goes back to something that I think my first patch that I contributed to Evergreen was removing the need this separate bootstrap.conf file, which actually contained mostly the same information that's in this XML file, but they just didn't have time to go around eliminating the duplication of that configuration. So that was the first thing I did, since near and dear to my heart. What we started with is defining the sets of routers that sit on the system. So we want a public router and a private router. And we talked about the services that these guys offer. So on my system, my OpenSurf public router is offering this list of services. The math service, which does things like add 2+2 for you. Actor acquisition. These are all library services, so things like search, it searches the database to give you results. Permacrud and pcrud we'll talk about later. And yeah, we don't have C-stores involved. Permacrud and pcrud are database permission-aware database interfaces for objects in the library system. Vandelay for importing, exporting. Those are all the services that are offered on the public routed network. And here you can see with the private localhost, because I'm running everything locally on my laptop, you can see that this is the private router. Because it's the private router, it's got a basically special access to every application that's going to be served up, because it's got to, because that's going to get access to those. Right. So just give information like this is the Jabber username and the Jabber password. So one of the first ways that I initially created a Jabber user was to connect Digit to the Jabber server and create a new user that way. There's actually a nice command line way of doing it, the most reasonable servers. And our logging, you've got the choice of throwing in a syslog or into a file. Logging level.